Hello everyone and welcome to the English conversation. As you can see, this week Irene and I are rejoined together again. And our topic this week was family, and we didn't really know what to do in this video, so we decided to speak about one of the most famous and influential. We will see how influential they are, but one of the most famous families in the world, the British royal family. Don't worry, if you are not a fan of the royals, we are not going to talk about like the latest gossip.
Yes.
We want talk more about three famous and influential kings and queens during history. So if you like history, or if you just like something else, hopefully you will find it in the video. And yes.
Yes, because I didn't know about the British royal family
Yes.
or about this king or queens, and it's very interesting. So we hope you like it.
Yes, and we have three kings, or one king and two queens, and we have the questions: how long were they on the throne? How much power did they have? What was their role in these different times? And what happened in general during their reign? So we will start with the oldest king that we have, and this is King Henry the Eighth. Yes.
Yes. This king, he lived, as you can see, from 1491 to 1547. I'm going to talk about first about how was his character, I
Yes.
think, and then I'm going to talk about his reign. And he was very well known from his 6 marriages. There is a song I wanted to sing it. It's like Henry has so many wives that have to die because he always had like a reason, or he pretended to have the reason to separate and sometimes to kill them if they really were bad with him. So some of them were executed. And also, he was extravagant spender, because when he got the money that I will talk about the English Church Reformation, and he dissolved the monasteries, he took the money for him and for the royal revenue. Also, in his private life, he liked to compose and to write. So it's also interesting. And it's true that he was the people I read the opinions, and they consider him attractive, education, and accomplished king. So he has been described as one of the most charismatic rulers on the English throne, and his reign has been described as the most important, or one of the most important in the English history.
Okay.
So very interesting. Yes. And about his reign, he was in the throne from 1509 to 1547. And as I told you, he initiated the English Reformation, like the separation from the church, the church from the Pope's authority. But this is very funny. Like, why? Because he wanted the annulment of his first marriage, and he asked the Pope, and the Pope disagreed. So because of this, he initiated the English Reformation, and he didn't want the Pope to have the authority. And also he made the Parliament's involvement in religion and in religious and dynastic changes. And he increased the role of the Parliament also in taxation. So he also gave power to the Parliament.
Like, he actively gave it to the Parliament. It
Yes.
didn't got taken.
No, he
Interesting.
yes, and he expanded the royal power, and he also did changes in the English constitution, and also he was considered the father of the Royal Navy, because he is gave a lot of money to the Royal Navy. And also he was the first English monarch as the King of Ireland.
This is, of course,
yes,
problematic to this day, but yes.
Yeah. And concerning the expansion of the royal power, he increased the divine right of the kings, and he also put charges of treason and heresy to the dissents, the people who were not in favor of the king. So he executed without a formal trial, like you are against me, so I execute you, to show his power. And yes, he also finally focused the foreign policy on the Western Europe, and I read that he increased the relations with Spain and France too. So he did a lot of things, but I think the main important thing that the people know is the English Reformation, and also the power he gave.
Yes, but for me it's interesting because you have this contrast between giving more power to the parliament, on the other hand, executing people who think that you are not like the rightful king. So
yes, it's like I decide and that's everything.
And can I ask you one more thing?
Yes.
You wrote down changes to the English constitution.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Sorry that maybe I said it and I forgot it. Yes, like he made changes, and like I don't know exactly the changes, but one of them was the theory of the divine right of the kings. So the king has the
highest power.
Yes, the highest power. So he changed it for him to have power.
Because for me it's so interesting that until this day, now sorry, this is the political nerd in me maybe, but to this day the Britain doesn't have one constitution. I think almost every European state has it, but Britain doesn't have it. Like they have like official documents who serve as a constitution, like for example the Magna Charta and some other document, but they don't have one like constitution, and for me this is very weird. But yeah, it's just the different history. Our next monarch is Queen Victoria. She lived from 1819 to 1901, and I think she's one of the most famous British monarchs. If you study British history, you cannot get around the like Victorian era, I think, and it's named after her because, well, so many things happened in this era. And she was also queen from 1937 to 1901. So now Queen Elizabeth, who is now on the throne, is longer than her on the throne, but she's the second longest reigning monarch in British history. And first I want to talk a little bit about her personal life. I don't know if royals really have a personal life, but well, when she was born, she was actually the 5th in line for the throne, but it was expected of her to become queen because there was like a slight crisis in who would get the throne next, because she had 3 uncles and then her father who were all in line for the throne, but none of them had children. So her father also died soon after her birth, and 2 uncles died as well. So pretty soon she became like the first in line after her still living uncle who was on the throne. But her childhood was very controlled by her mother and by one of her mother's servants who wanted to stay close to the power, as people sometimes want to do. So they really tried to manipulate her. However, she became queen just shortly after her 18th birthday, and then she freed herself a little bit of her mother and of this servant. And then in 1840 she married her cousin, actually, but she didn't know like him before. He was from Germany, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. For me it's weird to see this English name because I also know the German name, but yes. And with him she had 9 children in 16 years, although she hated childbirth.
God.
Yes, I don't know. And actually I find it also interesting that as the monarch of Britain, it was expected of her to do the proposal. So she did the proposal, and I also read in the beginning of her marriage she wanted to be the strong one in the marriage, but after like 2 years it turned around, and her husband had a lot of influence also in Britain through her, obviously. Yes. And then in 1861, her husband died. So he only was 41 years old. And she was very sad. For 10 years, she didn't do any public appearances or anything at all. And for the rest of her life, which was a long life still, she only wore black. But there were other men in her life who had like an influence on her, like not necessarily partners, but who had a big influence on her. Yes, and her 50 years as well as her 60-year jubilee or anniversary on the throne were heavily celebrated. I will talk about this a little later. And finally, after her death, her eldest son followed her on the throne. Yes, and now we come to her reign, what happened in Britain and in the world during her reign. As well as with Henry, as we now learn, there was a big contrast. In general, the Victorian era is also so famous not only because of her, but because of all the things that happened. One big thing was the industrialization in Britain. So many important things were invented. For example, the telephone and other things. And then the other big thing, which is in connection to her, was the growing empire. So, of course, the US had like their liberation movement and they were like freed from Britain. But as you can see also on the map, the red parts was all controlled by Britain in the end of her reign. So in her reign, Britain's empire had the biggest, was the biggest. And one big example of this is India. When she got on the throne, the big parts of India were controlled by the British East India Company. So not directly by the British government, but by this like more or less private company. But then in 1857, the British East India Company gave all these like areas in India to the British government, so it became part, or it was controlled by Britain. And Queen Victoria actually became the Empress of India, which was like a big title because India was considered to be like, you say, the crown in the jewels of the British empire, because it was considered like the most beautiful colony. Yes, and then on the other hand, like she was very much the symbol. No, she was very much the symbol of this British nation. She was a strong monarch. I will talk about this later, and she was considered the face, I would even say, of this like great British nation. But on the other hand, there were political reforms that limited her power. And unlike Henry, these reforms were not given, like she didn't allow the parliament to have more rights. These reforms were fought for by the people. And examples for these reforms are, for example, the right to vote was passed to also ordinary British men, of course, not women. And also the right to vote secretly, like we have it also now. This was also a right passed during her reign. And also during her reign, political parties started to develop and really gain power in Britain. So during her reign, it was the time where the political system as a system to govern a country really gained power, which of course meant that she lost power because before the monarchs were governing the country. So this is very interesting also to see.
There is a contrast.
Yes. And finally, a little bit more about her role as the monarch. When she got to the throne, the monarchy was quite unpopular in Britain because the people thought, oh, the monarchs are just spending a lot of money and not doing a lot for the country. Like all over Europe, there was the movement, Republican movement, for example, in France. So, the monarchy was quite unpopular. And in general, you can see when you read about her time on the throne that there were times where she was more popular, and there was also times of crisis and scandal. But overall, you can say that she improved the role of the monarch, or how the monarch is seen in Britain, together a lot with her husband, because they started to expand the monarch's public role. So they were the first ones who really went to charity events, who went to open some institutions and so on, like we know it now from the Queen, I suppose.
Yes,
and
I will.
they started it, and because they started it, because then it was more seen, oh, the royal family is actually doing something for our country, and they are earning their keep, as you say in Britain. And they also supported charities and school and education, yes. And also the art, where also like artistic movements they supported. And yes, and because of this, there was also, like, you can say, the start of modern celebrity culture, because there was the first ever photos, or one of the first ever photos taken in Britain was, of course, of the Queen. And during her time, there were photos sold of her as like little souvenirs. And there were also pictures of her printed, like we also know it now, printed on mugs and cups and so on. Like, especially later, in her later reign, for her jubilees, because when she was 50 years on the throne, and also when she was 60 years on the throne, there were big celebrations all over the British Empire. And I think she really gained some more popularity after this. But like I said, she was also very much the symbol of like the British Empire. So this was also, I think, one of the reasons why she was very popular, because she was considered like especially later, because she was so long on the throne and so on, as like a solid monarch with a big empire. Yes. One of the times of crisis was after her husband's death, because, as I said, she didn't take any public roles or public appearance for 10 years. So this is, of course, a long time for the Republican movement to start up again, to say, hey, where is our queen? And yes. Okay, and yes, like I said, after she returned, she became popular again, and she started to some royal traditions that exist to this day. And examples for this are living in Buckingham Palace. She was the first one who made this her residence, and also opening the British Parliament every year. So I think the British Parliament needs opening every year after they had some kind of break, and the Queen does it until this day, and she started with this tradition as well. Okay, and well, I want to say one disclaimer. Of course, I tell all these things from a nowadays perspective. Of course, Queen Victoria is also can be seen also, her reign is also the time where the British Empire grows bigger, but of course expanded, thank you, of course, with costs, like from our perspective nowadays, like very much like what happened in India, for example, or something.
Like if you study the growth of the British Empire, of course, you can always find bad things.
Like, I don't want, this is just a, well, neutral, you cannot say probably, but it's...
And also from a more British point of view.
Yes, I suppose, yes.
Now I'm going to talk about Elizabeth II, the nowadays queen, and she was born in 1926. And about her life, there is a book which is called The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford, and it's a story about her in the royal family. So if you are interested, you can. And also about her life, she lived in Scotland during the Second World War. She like her family told her to go to Canada because it would be safer, but her mother told her no, go to Scotland because it's near. And also like an interesting thing is, like, many people said that she doesn't express her own political opinions in the public forum, so the people don't talk about her in politics. And also she has a deep sense of religious and civic duty, as you said, of the charity. Like, she participates in 600 organizations and charities, which is very, like, about civic duties. Also, she liked horses a lot. She's a horsewoman. And also, she is considered one of the world's richest women. And because of her financial and property holdings that she has.
Yes, but I recently also saw like an interesting comparison how much like the royals own and how much money they bring to the British economy, which you also have to consider. Like, yeah, I don't want to say like, oh, the royals are great. Not this is not what I want to say, but like it's interesting that they also bring so much money, like to the tourism sector, especially.
Yes,
Yes.
it's true. There's a difference in comparison to Spain.
Yes,
with
because
this.
they are so famous, like in England, for their royalty, I think. Okay.
Okay, and now about her reign. Well, as I said, she is the Queen of UK and also like of Northern Ireland from 1952, and also the head of the Commonwealth realms too. And she is the longest reigning monarch in British history. Like as you say, Victoria, she was the second, so she is considered the first. And her father was King George VI, so she took the role. And also she did like a 7-month tour around the world, and it was very interesting when I read about it. And like a good thing that she did, she opened the 23rd Canadian Parliament. You also like talked about Victoria.
Yes, because she did it all. Yes, she does it all the time in Britain, but she's also the king of, like, the head of state in Canada, I believe, in Canada.
And also she is known because she brought the modern role of the monarchy. For example, the television of the royal family domestic life in 1970s. And also like she tried to modernize the monarchy, and also she was criticized a little bit because, for example, I read that she refused to allow the national flag to fly over the Buckingham Palace like once.
Okay.
Like for her it was a way to modernize, and she was criticized for this
Yes.
like once, but like
So,
it's not
yeah. So she has to modernize
like
the.
yes, like not to
but-
follow like much the traditional.
Yeah.
Like she wanted to modernize, and of course she had also criticized. She was criticized because of this. And also she was the first British monarch who addressed the United States Congress. Also I read.
Yes, and I think, like you said, with the tour around the world, I think she is the British monarch who has visited the most like countries of the Commonwealth and so on. Like, and yes, of course, the Commonwealth is also young, but like the most British like former colonies and so on. But of course, that's only logical with the like technical possibilities we have today for traveling and so on, I think.
Yes. So yes, like and about the United States Congress, it was in 1991 in the coalition victory in the Gulf War. And finally, she had like some kind of celebration, like the Golden Jubilee, because in 2002 she celebrated the 50 years on the throne, and the Diamond Jubilee in 2012, 60 years on the throne. And in 2006 and 17 she is like became older or more tired, and she reduced her official engagements. She didn't participate too much as before, and in 2020 like they released the series The Crown, which is a series in Netflix, and like her private life became popular, so
Yes,
more
but
people
it's
know
a
about it.
fictional series.
Yes,
But it's about her life. So.
yes. And also like she is characterized because she was like of her simplicity in the court life, like she didn't engage a lot the court, and she was very interested in the government business too. Like I read, and she participated a lot and helped.
Okay, so this was the English video for this week. We hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit about the British monarchy. I feel like this is a big topic if you learn English, like Britain, a British English. And yes, we will see you next week with another video.
Yeah.
And yes.
Bye.
Bye.